They dragged her to the altar of stone, a flat slab carved centuries ago, its surface darkened by rain, blood, and memory. The chains lay waiting, coiled like serpents at the foot of the rock, heavy with rust, yet eager as if alive. The girl's knees hit the ground. The guards forced her back against the cold wall of the mountain, her arms outstretched as though she were a warning nailed there for the world to see. The iron was cold, cruel. When the first shackle snapped around her wrist, she gasped at its bite. When the second closed, she screamed, not from pain but from the weight of hopelessness settling into her bones. The crowd pressed closer, their breath steaming in the dawn chill. Children clung to their mothers, peeking with wide eyes, caught between terror and fascination. Men tightened their cloaks, whispering prayers under their breath. Women turned their faces, but their ears drank every sound, the clink of iron, the girl's strangled cries, the elders' chants. The chief elder stepped forward, his staff dripping with goat's blood from the ritual. He dipped his finger in the gore and smeared it across the girl's forehead, a crimson mark that gleamed in the pale light. "You are given to the mountain," he intoned. "You are its bride, its feast, its silence." The villagers repeated after him, their voices trembling in unison. "Its bride, its feast, its silence." The girl thrashed, the chains rattling like thunder against the rock. Her voice tore from her throat, raw and furious. "Cowards! You feed me to stone because you fear its shadow. But the mountain knows your lies. It will not be satisfied with me, it will swallow you all." The guard struck her again, silencing her with fists and curses. Blood trickled from her lip, but her eyes still burned. Those who dared look at her felt something coil in their stomachs, a question they would not allow themselves to answer. The final chain was drawn across her chest, locking her body tight against the rock. She could barely breathe. The iron bit deep, bruising flesh, pinning her as if the mountain itself had chosen to hold her fast. The drums fell silent. Only the wind remained, sliding down the slopes, whistling through the cracks in the stone. The villagers backed away slowly, their task complete, their fear deepened. From her place on the mountain, the girl stared down at them all. Bloodied, chained, her body trembling, but her voice, when it came, was steady. "Watch the mountain," she whispered. "Watch how it answers." And though the people turned their backs, leaving her to the stone, many swore they felt the ground tremble faintly beneath their feet as they walked away. Night fell heavy and with it came silence. The villagers had returned to their huts, their chants fading into the distance, leaving only the girl and the mountain. The stars above blinked coldly, and the moon hung like a blade of bone, sharp and merciless. The girl's body sagged in the chains. Every breath burned, every shift sent iron digging deeper into her flesh. The stone at her back was colder than death, leaching the warmth from her bones. Hunger gnawed at her belly, but worse than hunger was thirst. Her lips cracked, her throat raw from screaming. The wind whispered through the trees below. At times it sounded like voices. Her mother's, her father's, the laughter of children who once played in the square. She shook her head, refusing to believe. Yet when the wind swelled again, it carried words too clear to be chants. "We hear you." Her eyes widened. She pressed her cheek against the stone as if straining to listen. The rock was not silent. It pulsed, faintly, like a heartbeat buried deep within the earth. Every so often, a low groan rumbled beneath her, so subtle it could be mistaken for the sighing of the wind, but too steady, too alive. The girl's breath quickened. She whispered through parched lips. "If you hear me, if you are more than stone, take me or free me. But do not let them win." The mountain answered not with words but with a shudder. A tiny crack opened near her feet, spilling a line of pebbles down the slope. Her chains rattled as if stirred by unseen hands. The girl gasped, a flicker of hope sparking in her chest. Far below in the village, dogs began to howl. Chickens squawked and fluttered in their cages. The elders, lying restless in their huts, stirred uneasily at the sound. Some whispered that the spirits were restless. Others said nothing, burying their fear under silence. Up on the cliff, the girl closed her eyes, tears mixing with blood on her face. For the first time since the chains bit into her, she smiled, a broken, trembling smile. The mountain had heard her. The moon was high when it came, a silver eye staring coldly upon the chained girl. She had grown still, her strength drained, her head bowed as if she had surrendered at last. The chains hung heavy, unmoving, gleaming like the fangs of some predator that had swallowed her whole. Then without warning the stone shuddered. It began as a low vibration, a murmur in the mountain's chest. The girl's eyes snapped open. The iron links at her wrists trembled, jingling softly, as though stirred by invisible hands. She pressed her cheek against the rock and felt it, a deep, slow heartbeat pulsing beneath the stone. Another tremor followed, stronger. Dust rained from the cracks above her. Pebbles broke loose and tumbled into the abyss below. The chains groaned in protest, pulled tight against the shifting surface. The girl gasped as one shackle slipped a fraction, scraping her skin raw. Then came the sound, a sharp, splitting crack like a tree snapping in half. It echoed across the valley, waking the sleeping village. Dogs barked wildly, children cried out in the dark, and the elders rose, dread coiling in their bellies. Up on the cliff, the girl lifted her head. Her eyes gleamed with something between terror and hope. The mountain was moving. From the village square, people stumbled into the night, staring up at the towering peak. Torches flared to life. A woman screamed that the gods were angry. An old man fell to his knees, clutching his amulet, begging for forgiveness. The chief elder emerged from his hut, his face pale but defiant. "It is nothing," he hissed. "The mountain grumbles but it accepts the sacrifice. Sleep. Return to your homes." But even as he spoke, another crack rang out, louder, deeper. The ground beneath their feet shifted, a ripple running through the soil like the breath of a buried giant. The girl strained against her chains, the iron cutting into her flesh. One link groaned, stretching, bending as if it too feared the power beneath it. She whispered through bloodied lips, "Yes, yes, wake." The mountain answered with a roar that shook the very air. Birds erupted from the trees in black clouds, their wings thrashing madly as they fled the slopes. The villagers shrieked, scattering in terror. And there, on the cliff face, as the dust swirled and the stones split wider, the girl laughed, a ragged, broken laugh but alive, defiant. The first crack had come. The mountain was no longer silent. The mountain's roar still rolled through the night when the elders gathered at the edge of the square. Torches hissed in the wind, casting shadows that danced like restless spirits across their faces. The villagers huddled together, wide-eyed, whispering of omens and vengeance. Some begged to climb the mountain and release the girl, to end the wrath before it grew. But the elder's eyes burned with something darker than fear, pride. "She is the one," spat the chief elder, slamming his staff into the earth. "Do you not see? The mountain stirs because it hungers. It groans because the sacrifice is not yet complete. By dawn its anger will pass. But if we betray the ritual, if we loose her chains, the curse will grow teeth." The other elders nodded, their jaws tight, though their hands trembled. It was easier to command belief than to admit doubt. Easier to feed the mountain one life than to face the truth of their lies. From the cliffs above, another crack thundered, showering sparks of stone down the slopes. The villagers shrieked. Dust billowed across the valley, choking the air. "Release her," someone cried from the crowd, a woman clutching her child to her chest. "The spirits do not want her blood, they want justice." The elders turned as one, their eyes sharp as blades. The chief elder's voice cut through the panic like a whip. "Silence. It is your fear that feeds this chaos. Doubt is a poison and the mountain hears it. Would you see your own child chained in her place?" The woman's courage faltered. She bowed her head, clutching her child tighter, and said no more. Around her, the people shrank back, their hopes smothered beneath the weight of the elder's wrath. On the mountain, the girl hung in her chains, her body shaking with exhaustion, but her eyes alive with fury. She heard the echo of their words drifting up the slopes, and she spat blood into the dust at her feet. "Liars," she hissed. "You chain me because you fear yourselves." Another tremor rolled through the stone, stronger this time. The chains rattled violently. A link snapped, not free but cracked, weakened. The girl gasped, biting back a cry of triumph. Below, the chief elder raised his staff once more, his voice rising over the trembling earth. "Hold the ritual. Hold the chains tight. Let the mountain taste her until it is done." But even as he shouted, the mountain growled louder, like a beast laughing at its captors. The elders had chosen defiance. And the mountain had chosen them. The first light of dawn bled across the horizon, pale and weak. Yet the village did not wake to the crow of roosters or the hum of morning fires. They woke to the growl of the earth itself. It began deep beneath the soil, a rolling thunder no sky could contain. The ground shivered, then bucked, throwing clay pots from shelves, splitting the thatch of roofs. Goats screamed in their pens, chickens flapped wildly, and children clung to their mothers as the earth refused to stay still. On the mountain, the girl's chains shuddered, rattling like bones in a jar. She pressed her back harder against the rock, her arms burning as the iron bit deeper. But through her pain she felt it, the mountain was no longer merely trembling. It was waking. The villagers poured into the square, shouting, crying. Dust clouds swirled in the air, stinging eyes and throats. The elders forced themselves to the front, staffs raised, their chants tumbling from dry lips. They tried to steady their voices, but the quiver of fear betrayed them. The mountain hungers. Hold the sacrifice, the chief elder bellowed, though his voice cracked like old wood. It is only the storm of its anger. By nightfall, it will be still again. But the mountain answered with violence. The ground split with a deafening crack, tearing a jagged wound through the center of the square. A hut collapsed into the fissure, swallowing a screaming family whole. Dust erupted upward as though the earth itself spat out the taste of blood. The villagers shrieked, scattering like frightened birds. Some fled to the fields, others dropped to their knees, clawing at the dirt as if prayer could stitch the land back together. The air filled with the stench of fear. Up on the cliff, the girl threw her head back and screamed, not in terror but in triumph. The mountain roared with her, its voice a grinding thunder that made stones leap from the slopes. One of her shackles snapped fully, the chain recoiling like a broken serpent. Her arm dropped free, numb and bloodied but alive. Far below, the chief elder stared at the crumbling slopes. His lips moved but no prayer came. The staff in his hands shook as if it too feared the god he had tried to command. Another quake struck, harder than before. The trees on the mountain's side tore from the soil, roots dangling like broken veins. Rocks the size of cattle tumbled down, smashing huts to splinters, flattening fields, crushing the fleeing beneath their weight. The elders screamed for order, but their voices were swallowed by the chaos. One by one their chants broke, their pride splintered. The people no longer listened. The mountain had drowned out all human law. The girl, half free, half bound, lifted her bleeding arm toward the sky. Her voice rose above the thunder, hoarse and ragged, but filled with fire. You chain me to stone. Now the stone comes for you. And with that, the mountain bellowed once more and the earth split wider. The awakening had only begun. The mountain roared like a wounded beast, its fury shaking the very air. The girl clung to the stone, her body pulled taut by the remaining chains, her arm already free and bleeding. Each tremor rattled the iron tighter against her flesh, but with every quake, the links groaned, stretched, weakened. A boulder broke loose above her, tumbling down with a scream of stone. It smashed against the ledge, splintering into shards that cut her skin, but the force rattled another shackle loose. The chain snapped with a sound like thunder splitting the sky. Her second arm fell free. The girl gasped, pulling her bloodied wrists close to her chest. Pain seared through her veins, but her heart blazed hotter than the wounds. She looked at the remaining chains binding her legs, thick and unyielding, coiled around her like the last snakes of a dying god. Break, she whispered through clenched teeth. Break as they will break. The mountain answered. The ground heaved, a violent spasm that sent a wave of rubble cascading down the slope. The ledge beneath her cracked open, spitting stone fragments into the abyss. Her leg chains rattled violently, straining against the fissures spreading through the rock. Below, the villagers watched in horror as the sacred cliff split apart. Dust rolled down like storm clouds, and the girl's silhouette appeared through the haze, no longer a victim but something defiant, almost divine. The chief elder staggered forward, raising his staff as if the wood could command the mountain's rage. Hold her. Hold her chains. She must not be freed, he cried, his voice shrill, desperate. But the mountain laughed. A final quake surged upward, the ledge exploding beneath the girl's feet. The chains around her legs tore loose, their broken ends whipping against the rock before vanishing into the chasm below. The girl fell forward, free at last. She caught herself against the mountain's face, trembling, her body weak but alive. Her breath came in ragged bursts, but her eyes burned with a fire that no chain could extinguish. She rose slowly, every movement a rebellion, her hair whipping in the dust-filled wind. She stood upon the ledge as the mountain bellowed beneath her, her arms outstretched, the broken shackles dangling like trophies. The villagers cried out. Some fled into the fields. Others fell to their knees, calling her a spirit, a goddess, the mountain's chosen. But the elders saw only their doom in her gaze. The chains lay broken at her feet, and the mountain had claimed its bride not through sacrifice, but through wrath. And the wrath was only beginning. The chains clattered against the stone, broken, useless. The girl stood unbound upon the ledge, her bloodied wrists lifted to the sky. Behind her, the mountain groaned like an awakened giant, its voice filling the valley. Below, the villagers screamed and scattered. Mothers dragged their children toward the river, men fled into the fields, abandoning homes that cracked and splintered under the tremors. But the elders did not run. Pride, sharper than fear, chained them where iron could not. "This is blasphemy," the chief elder shrieked, thrusting his staff toward the cliff where the girl stood. "She deceives you. The mountain is ours to command, not hers." But his words crumbled like dry leaves beneath the sound of the earth splitting open. A great fissure tore across the square, splitting it in two. One hut vanished in a spray of dust as the ground swallowed it whole. A man dove to save his son, but the earth closed before he reached him. The screams were cut short. The mountain did not listen to prayers. The mountain punished. From its slopes, rocks the size of cattle thundered downward. One struck the line of elders, smashing two beneath its weight, their bones splintering like kindling. Another rolled through the square, scattering villagers like frightened birds. The chief elder staggered back, his staff slipping from his hands. His lips moved, trying to summon words of command, but no god heard him now. High above, the girl stood unshaken, her hair whipping wild in the storm of dust. She looked down upon them, her voice ragged but strong, carrying even over the roar of stone. "You chain me to silence. Now silence comes for you." Another quake split the ground. The sacred altar in the square cracked down the middle, spilling offerings of blood and bone into the fissure. The villagers wailed, their traditions shattered along with the stone. The chief elder fell to his knees, his pride bleeding away at last. He raised his trembling hands to the girl on the cliff. "Spare us," he begged. "Spare your people. Spare me." The girl's eyes burned. For a moment, the chains still dangling from her wrists clinked softly in the wind, a reminder of every blow, every curse, every lie. Her voice dropped, cold as the stone itself. "I was innocent. You bound me in cruelty. Now the mountain binds you in truth." And the mountain obeyed her words. With a final, shattering roar, a section of the slope collapsed. A torrent of rock and dust thundered into the valley, crushing the elders beneath its fury. Their screams were brief, swallowed by stone. The chief elder vanished in the avalanche, his outstretched hands the last thing seen before the rubble buried him whole. When the dust settled, silence fell heavy. The square was gone, buried beneath broken earth. The huts lay shattered, smoke rising from fires snuffed out by falling debris. Survivors huddled at the edges of the village, wide-eyed, their faces streaked with fear and ash. And on the cliff, the girl still stood, unbroken, the mountain's wrath at her back. The mountain had devoured its chosen prey. The dust lingered in the air like a shroud, settling slowly over the ruins of the village. Where once children's laughter echoed and fires burned warm in the night, there was now only silence. A silence broken only by the groans of shifting stone and the distant weeping of survivors. The girl stood upon the ledge, her broken shackles clinking softly as they swung from her wrists. Her body trembled with exhaustion, blood crusted on her arms and face, but she remained upright, her eyes fierce. Against the pale dawn, she looked less like flesh and more like something carved from the mountain itself. Below, the survivors lifted their gazes. Mothers clutched their children close. Men leaned on broken spears, the elderly pressed trembling hands to their chests. Fear and awe rippled through them in equal measure. "She lives," one whispered. "No." She rose, another breathed. The girl stepped forward. The broken ledge cracked beneath her feet but held, as though the mountain itself bent to carry her. Slowly she descended, not stumbling, not rushing, but moving with a steadiness that made the survivors bow their heads as she passed. When she reached the square, she found only ruin. The altar was split in half, its offerings of blood and bones scattered across the fissures. Huts lay flattened, livestock crushed or fled. And among the rubble, the crushed bodies of the elders lay still, their staffs snapped, their mouths choked with dust. The girl stopped before them. For a long moment she said nothing. The survivors watched, waiting for her to curse or spit or rejoice in vengeance. But instead, she simply stood, her chest rising and falling, her shadow stretching across the broken bodies of those who had condemned her. "You thought me weak," she whispered, her voice hoarse but steady. "You thought chains could silence me. But the mountain hears truth. And the mountain moves for it." Her words carried, echoing across the ruins as though the broken stones themselves repeated them. The villagers lowered their heads. Some wept. Others clutched the earth, whispering prayers of repentance. A small boy, his face streaked with ash, stepped forward. In his hands he held a scrap of cloth torn from his hut. He looked up at her with wide, frightened eyes. Are you the mountain spirit?" he asked. The girl looked down at him. For a heartbeat she almost laughed, not with joy but with the bitter memory of her humanity. She was no spirit, no goddess. She was a girl who had bled, suffered, and screamed against stone. And yet, as she stood there, unbroken amid ruin, she knew the villagers would never see her as only human again. "I am what you made me," she said at last, her voice heavy. "A chain sacrifice. And I am what the mountain chose to free." The boy bowed low, pressing the cloth to her feet. Others followed, falling to their knees one by one, whispering her name as though it were a prayer. But the girl did not smile. Her eyes wandered the shattered land, the broken homes, the graves buried beneath stone. Vengeance had been fed, but the cost was carved deep into the valley. She had survived, but survival was not peace. As the sun climbed higher, painting the ruins in cruel light, she turned her back on the villagers. She walked toward the mountain's path, her chains dragging behind her like iron echoes of the past. None dared stop her. None dared speak. They watched her climb until her figure blurred in the morning haze, a lone shadow bound to both earth and sky. And though she left the village behind, her story did not. It rooted itself in the survivors' tongues, spreading across the lands as a warning. Do not chain the innocent. Do not twist truth into sacrifice. For when the mountain moves, it crushes not the guilty alone, but all who worship cruelty. And so the girl walked into legend, her chains broken, but their sound forever echoing in the hearts of those who remembered. The girl vanished into the mountain, but her absence did not erase her. Instead, her presence grew heavier, as if her shadow had stretched far beyond the valley. In the days that followed, survivors staggered through the wreckage, burying their dead, rebuilding their huts with trembling hands. Yet when they spoke, they did not speak of hunger or grief. They spoke of her. They called her the girl of chains, the mountain's bride, the stonebreaker. At first, the stories passed in whispers, shared around meager fires when night fell heavy and the winds howled through the broken square. Mothers told their children, she rose from the mountain's grip. Hunters carried the tale to neighboring villages, their voices low but urgent. The earth itself moved for her. Soon the story spread like wildfire. Across rivers and forests, across savannas and cliffs, her name traveled. And with each telling, the story grew sharper, darker, more divine. Some said the mountain had chosen her as its mouth, that her cries had been the thunder that split the stone. Others claimed her blood had sunk into the earth, awakening something ancient that no chains could contain. And some whispered she was no longer a girl at all, but a spirit who walked unseen, her broken shackles rattling in the night, warning those who sought to spill innocent blood. In every version, one truth remained unshaken. The elders who chained her were gone, buried by the very god they worshipped. Fear took root in villages far and wide. Elders who once ruled by sacrifice now trembled in secret. They remembered the story each time the ground shivered, each time thunder rolled across the hills. The mountain no longer belonged to them, it belonged to her. And yet, not all who heard the tale feared. Some felt hope kindle in their chests. Women whispered her name when their husbands raised hands against them. The poor muttered prayers to her when the powerful demanded tribute. Children carved her figure into the dirt, shackles drawn as wings, believing that one day the mountain would rise for them too. Still, in the shadows the story twisted. Traders and travelers spoke of villages where elders banned her name, where the mere whisper of the mountain's bride was punished with lash and exile. For fear is a desperate thing, it clings to power as chains cling to wrists. But the legend did not die. It moved faster than silence could contain, spreading from fire to fire, tongue to tongue, until even kings heard of her. And though they scoffed in their halls of stone, their eyes flickered toward the mountains with unease. The girl herself was nowhere to be found. Some claimed they saw her wandering ridges at dusk, her chains dragging sparks against the stone. Others swore she had become part of the mountain, watching, waiting, ready to move again if cruelty was dared. She was no longer just a girl. She was a warning carved into the land. The story of the chained girl spread far, but not all tongues carried it as hope. In the courts of rulers, in the huts of priests, and in the whispers of fearful elders, the legend became something else, a weapon sharpened by fear. In one village, the elders gathered under the shadow of a crumbling shrine. Their faces were lined with worry, not for their people but for themselves. The tale of the mountain's bride had reached their ears, and with it came unrest. Mothers questioned why their daughters should be offered as tribute. Men whispered of rebellion, their eyes flicking with courage where once there was none. If the people believe her story, one elder hissed, they will turn against us. They already stir, another replied. They look at us as if we are the chains. The chief elder struck his staff against the ground, silencing them. Then we will chain the story itself. And so it began. They twisted the legend, reshaping it with lies. In their retellings, the girl was no savior but a curse. She had betrayed her people, they said, and the mountain punished them all for her defiance. Her survival was not a gift but a doom, a warning of what happens when the ritual is broken. Priests took the lie and dressed it in holy words. The girl of chains defied the will of the mountain, they cried from their altars. And her wrath brought ruin. Do not follow her or you will share her fate. Fear seeped into the cracks of hope. Children who once carved her image in dirt now whispered her name only in secret. Women who once prayed to her spirit now bowed their heads, afraid of the priest's ears. But fear is a brittle chain. The more the rulers pressed the tale of her as a curse, the more the people remembered the truth hidden beneath the lie. Whispers grew stronger in secret gatherings. She was innocent. She was betrayed. The mountain crushed those who chained her, not those who freed her. And so two versions of her story walked the land, one of fire and justice, one of curse and doom. The powerful clung to the second, wielding it to keep their grip. The powerless held the first close to their hearts, waiting, watching, whispering. One day the mountain will move again. But neither side could stop the truth, the earth itself. For whenever the ground trembled, whenever cliffs split or stones rolled down slopes, the people felt it in their bones. The girl was not gone. She was listening. And fear, no matter how rulers tried to twist it, always answered to her. The night fires burned low in the villages, but the whispers burned hotter. Men and women gathered in shadows, away from the ears of elders and priests, their voices trembling not with fear, but with something sharper, defiance. They told the story again, the real story. Not the twisted lies the rulers had carved into chants, but the tale carried by survivors. The girl who was chained, who bled, who screamed, and who rose with the mountain at her back. She was one of us, a hunter whispered, his eyes darting toward the darkened huts of the elders. They called her guilty. But the chains did not hold her. The mountain itself tore them apart. And it tore the elders apart too, added a woman, clutching her child close. Their power shattered like their bones. Remember that. Around the circle, heads nodded. Fear still gnawed at their bellies, but it was not the fear of the girl's curse. It was the fear of being caught, and that fear carried a strange kind of courage. In another village across the river, the same whispers stirred. A boy who had lost his mother to sacrifice clenched his fists as he spoke. If she could rise, so can we. The chains are not iron, they are lies. And lies can break. The whispers traveled farther than the rulers ever expected. Traders carried them along dusty roads, shepherds sang them into valleys, children whispered them in play. Each telling was a seed, and in every village where it took root, defiance bloomed. The rulers sensed it. Priests shouted louder, warning that the girl of chains would bring ruin if her name was honored. Elders threatened lashings, exile, even death. But the more they pressed, the more people clung to her memory. For in their hearts, the villagers remembered the truth. It was not the girl who destroyed the village. It was the elders' cruelty, their stubbornness, their chains. And if the mountain had risen once, it could rise again. One night, a group of women gathered in secret by the river. Their voices were low, their eyes sharp. They think the chains make us powerless, one said. But chains can be broken. She showed us that. Another nodded. Then let us break them ourselves. Not wait for the mountain, be the mountain. The idea was dangerous. Treason some would call it. Death others would fear it. But in the quiet night, the women agreed. Their children would not be bound. Their daughters would not be dragged to altars. Their sons would not watch in silence. So began the whispers of rebellion. They were not yet armies. They carried no banners, raised no spears. But they carried something greater, a story that could not be silenced. And though the rulers did not yet see it, the mountain was already moving again, not in stone this time but in hearts. The morning after the flames, smoke still curled from the ashes of the shrine. The air smelled of charred wood and freedom. The villagers moved among the ruins not with shame, but with something new in their step, a defiance that no elder could stamp out. But rebellion is not a secret that can stay caged. A shepherd carried word to the next valley, the elder's shrine is ash. The people rise. A hunter took it across the river, the girl of chains has returned in fire. Traders whispered it along the roads, their voices alive with awe. And with every telling the story grew sharper, louder, bolder. In one distant village, a mother heard the tale and clenched her hands into fists. Her daughter had been promised a sacrifice in the next season. That night she gathered the women, and together they stormed the elder's hut. The staff that once ruled them lay broken by dawn. In another land, a boy who had lost his father to tribute led a band of youths to smash the storehouse where grain was hoarded. They scattered food into the hands of the hungry, shouting, "The chains break! The chains break!" Their cries echoed until the hills themselves seemed to answer. Everywhere rebellion wore a new face. Some burned shrines, some broke staffs, some simply refused to kneel. But in every act of defiance, the story of the girl of chains was invoked. Her chains had broken. Now theirs would too. The rulers watched with growing unease. Priests thundered from their altars, spitting curses upon her name. Elders huddled in secret councils, arguing whether to crush the uprisings with soldiers or twist the legend further into fear. But the ground shifted beneath their words, and the old order slipped like sand between their fingers. The rebellion was not an army. It was a fire. And fire does not march in lines, it leaps, it spreads, it consumes. One night, in a valley far from the mountain, a group of villagers gathered at a riverbank. They lit torches not to burn shrines but to raise them high in the air. 1,000 flames flickered like stars reflected in the dark water. Together they chanted, their voices rising above the wind. Chains break. Chains break. Chains break. Their chant spread, carried by echo and song. It reached ears across valleys, over plains, through forests. Soon the words were everywhere, chanted in markets, whispered in fields, scratched into the mud walls of huts. Chains break. The rulers tried to stamp it out, but for every voice silenced, 3 more rose. For every shrine rebuilt, 2 more burned. For every soldier sent, a village vanished into the hills, carrying their defiance with them. And above it all, the story of the girl grew brighter, sharper. Some said she walked among them, unseen, guiding their hands. Others swore she appeared in dreams, her shackles broken, her eyes aflame. Whether truth or myth, it did not matter, the people believed. The rebellion no longer belonged to a single valley. It belonged to the land itself. And the land was moving just as the mountain once had. The morning after the flames, smoke still curled from the ashes of the shrine. The air smelled of charred wood and freedom. The villagers moved among the ruins not with shame, but with something new in their step, a defiance that no elder could stamp out. But rebellion is not a secret that can stay caged. A shepherd carried word to the next valley, the elder's shrine is ash. The people rise. A hunter took it across the river, the girl of chains has returned in fire. Traders whispered it along the roads, their voices alive with awe. And with every telling the story grew sharper, louder, bolder. In one distant village, a mother heard the tale and clenched her hands into fists. Her daughter had been promised a sacrifice in the next season. That night, she gathered the women, and together they stormed the elder's hut. The staff that once ruled them lay broken by dawn. In another land, a boy who had lost his father to tribute led a band of youths to smash the storehouse where grain was hoarded. They scattered food into the hands of the hungry, shouting, "The chains break! The chains break!" Their cries echoed until the hills themselves seemed to answer. Everywhere rebellion wore a new face. Some burned shrines, some broke staffs, some simply refused to kneel. But in every act of defiance, the story of the girl of chains was invoked. Her chains had broken. Now theirs would too. The rulers watched with growing unease. Priests thundered from their altars, spitting curses upon her name. Elders huddled in secret councils, arguing whether to crush the uprisings with soldiers or twist the legend further into fear. But the ground shifted beneath their words, and the old order slipped like sand between their fingers. The rebellion was not an army. It was a fire. And fire does not march in lines, it leaps, it spreads, it consumes. One night, in a valley far from the mountain, a group of villagers gathered at a riverbank. They lit torches not to burn shrines but to raise them high in the air. 1,000 flames flickered like stars reflected in the dark water. Together they chanted, their voices rising above the wind. Chains break. Chains break. Chains break. Their chant spread, carried by echo and song. It reached ears across valleys, over plains, through forests. Soon the words were everywhere, chanted in markets, whispered in fields, scratched into the mud walls of huts. Chains break. The rulers tried to stamp it out, but for every voice silenced, 3 more rose. For every shrine rebuilt, 2 more burned. For every soldier sent, a village vanished into the hills, carrying their defiance with them. And above it all, the story of the girl grew brighter, sharper. Some said she walked among them, unseen, guiding their hands. Others swore she appeared in dreams, her shackles broken, her eyes aflame. Whether truth or myth, it did not matter, the people believed. The rebellion no longer belonged to a single valley. It belonged to the land itself. And the land was moving just as the mountain once had. The whispers of rebellion traveled fast, but so did the ears of kings. In a palace far from the mountain, a ruler sat upon a throne of carved ivory. Messengers arrived breathless, their words sharp with urgency. Villages burning shrines, elders overthrown, the name of the girl of chains shouted like a war cry. The king's face hardened. One girl breaks her bonds, he muttered, and the land thinks itself free. He raised his hand. Then let them learn, chains are not so easily broken. He sent soldiers. They came in the hundreds, armored in bronze, their spears gleaming like fangs under the sun. They marched into villages where rebellion stirred, stamping the earth with iron boots. Fires were doused, torches crushed, and the ashes of shrines rebuilt with the blood of the defiant. In one valley, the villagers who had raised their chant, chains break, were dragged to the square. The soldiers forced them to their knees, their voices silenced by steel. But even as blades glinted above their heads, one woman lifted her chin and whispered, "She rose once. The mountain will rise again." Her words carried just far enough for a child to hear, and to remember. The soldiers killed swiftly, but memory is harder to slay than flesh. In another village, the king's men set an example. They chained youths to posts in the square, declaring them false prophets of the mountain's bride. Then they left the chains to bite into the flesh for all to see. "This is her gift," the captain sneered. "Pain and ruin." But at night, mothers crept silently to the posts, smuggling water and loosening knots. Whispers passed through the darkness like sparks. "She was innocent, they are innocent. We will not bow." The soldiers crushed rebellions, but with every act of brutality, the story of the girl grew stronger. The kings grew furious. Councils of rulers gathered in secret chambers, their voices heavy with dread. "If we let this fire spread, no village will bow. Then we must strike at the heart. We must erase her name." They commanded priests to forge new tales. The girl of chains had not been freed, they claimed, but buried forever. The mountain's fury was proof of her wickedness, not her innocence. Statues were raised in shrines, not of her, but of chained demons meant to resemble her. Children were told, "Fear her, hate her, never speak her name." But the people did speak. In hidden caves, in hushed markets, by fires that crackled like prophecy, they told the truth. They carved her likeness into stone, not as a demon but as a woman standing tall, broken shackles at her feet. The kings had their armies. The people had their story. And the story was sharper than any spear. For every soldier sent, another village burned with rebellion. For every lie preached, the truth was whispered louder. And for every chain raised, someone remembered the mountain's roar. The kings had unleashed their wrath. But they had also awakened something they could not kill. The mountain was moving again. The rebellions had been sparks, scattered and wild. But now they began to gather, to fuse, to burn as one. It started with footsteps. From valleys where shrines had turned to ash, from forests where chains had been shattered, from fields where soldiers had struck but not silenced, people began to move. Families packed what they could carry, sacks of grain, gourds of water, tools turned into weapons. They left their huts behind, walking not in fear but in purpose. At first they moved in small bands, a dozen here, 20 there. But as they met along roads and rivers, the bands merged. The whispers grew louder. The chants became shouts. And the shouts became thunder. "Chains break. Chains break." The cry rolled like a storm through valleys, shaking villages awake. Men who had once bowed their heads now lifted spears. Women who had once wept now sharpened blades. Children marched beside them, their voices ringing clear. "Chains break." They marched not as an army trained, but as a river swelling with rain. Slow at first, but with a weight no dam could hold. And like a river they carved their own path. When soldiers came to stop them, the people did not scatter. They closed ranks, shields of wood raised, stones in hand. The soldiers thrust with spears, but the villagers pushed back, their numbers swallowing the line. A few fell, but the march did not stop. The march never stopped. Word spread of their movement, carried ahead like the rumble of thunder before a storm. Villages along their path joined before soldiers could even warn their rulers. Fires were lit not as destruction but as signals, beacons calling others to rise. On the third moon of their march, the people reached a crossroads where 3 rivers met. There a council was formed. Not of kings or priests but of mothers, hunters, farmers and youths. They spoke beneath the stars, their voices rough with travel, but strong with unity. "We are no longer many villages," said a scarred hunter. "We are one. And one must have a heart," said a mother. "A symbol." They looked to the mountains on the horizon. They remembered the girl who had stood unbroken on the cliff, chains dangling at her wrists. "She is our heart," they said as one. "The girl of chains. The mountain moves in us." From that night, their march had a name, the March of Stone. They carved her likeness into banners of cloth and bark, drawn in ash and charcoal, a figure with arms raised, shackles broken, standing tall against the sky. When they marched, they carried her before them. When they fought, they shouted her name. When they buried their dead, they promised their spirits to her memory. The kings sent more soldiers, greater in number, with sharper blades and taller shields. But the people had become stone, unyielding, heavy, impossible to break. Where one village fell, 3 more rose. Where one voice was silenced, 10 more shouted. The march grew and grew, until the land itself seemed to tremble with its weight. Not from the earth this time, but from footsteps, thousands moving as one, echoing the mountain's roar. And as they marched, a question burned in every heart. If a girl once moved a mountain, what will happen when a people march as mountains themselves?